Picture this. You're standing in the heart of Moscow in 1560, watching as the most magnificent cathedral in all of Russia nears completion. The onion domes gleam like jewels against the gray sky, their colors so vibrant they seem to pulse with divine light. Every curve, every arch, every intricate detail speaks of architectural genius beyond anything the world has ever seen. You watch as Ivan IV, the Tsar of all Russia, approaches the master builder with what appears to be the highest honor any craftsman could receive, praise from the most powerful man on earth. But then you see something in the Tsar's eyes that makes your blood freeze. It's not gratitude you're witnessing, it's calculation. Cold, methodical calculation. The man they call Ivan the Terrible is already planning something that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Because what happens next will transform this moment of triumph into one of history's most shocking acts of cruelty. A crime so brutal it defies comprehension, yet so calculated it reveals the true nature of absolute power. The architect standing before Ivan has no idea he's about to become the victim of perhaps the most twisted logic in royal history. He believes his masterpiece has secured his future, that his genius has earned him the Tsar's eternal favor. He doesn't understand that in Ivan's mind, creating something too beautiful, too perfect, too magnificent is not a blessing. It's a death sentence. Before diving into this forgotten story of artistic triumph and human suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these dark chapters of history together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the complexities of human nature. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of royal excess. It's the story of how genius can become a curse, how beauty can inspire terror, and how the very act of creating something perfect can seal your fate in ways you never imagined. The cathedral that sparked this tragedy still stands today, its colorful domes a testament to human creativity and a monument to the price that brilliance sometimes pays. But to understand why Ivan the Terrible would destroy the man who gave him the most beautiful building in his empire, we must first understand the world that created both the cathedral and the monster who would commit this unthinkable act. Ivan IV came to power in a Russia that was emerging from centuries of domination by the Mongol Golden Horde. The Mongols had ruled Russian lands for over 2 centuries, extracting tribute, burning cities, and crushing any hint of rebellion with devastating efficiency. Their rule had taught Russian princes harsh lessons about power, that mercy was weakness, that fear was more reliable than love, and that spectacular displays of cruelty could prevent larger rebellions more effectively than armies. But Ivan wasn't just any Russian prince. He was the first to officially claim the title of Tsar, the Russian equivalent of Caesar, declaring himself not merely a prince among princes, but the emperor of all Russia. This wasn't just political ambition, it was a religious declaration. Ivan believed he ruled by divine right, that his power came directly from God, and that questioning his authority was tantamount to blasphemy. The young Ivan had witnessed horrors that would have broken a lesser mind. His father, Vasily III, died when Ivan was just 3 years old, leaving him heir to a throne surrounded by ambitious nobles who saw the boy prince as either a tool to be manipulated or an obstacle to be removed. The regency that followed was marked by constant intrigue, assassination, and political violence that played out in the very halls where young Ivan played. Ivan's mother, Elena Glinskaya, tried to protect her son while maintaining power, but she died under mysterious circumstances when Ivan was 8, almost certainly poisoned by rival nobles. From that moment, Ivan was essentially an orphan surrounded by enemies, watching as the men who were supposed to protect him plotted against each other and used him as a pawn in their deadly games. The boy who would become Ivan the Terrible learned early that survival required not just intelligence, but the willingness to be more ruthless than those around him. He absorbed lessons about power that would shape his entire reign, that loyalty was temporary, that even closest allies could become enemies, and that the only way to be truly safe was to make everyone else afraid. Court observers noted disturbing changes in Ivan's behavior as he grew older. As a child, he had been curious and intelligent, showing particular interest in books and learning. But by his teenage years, he had developed a taste for cruelty that shocked even the hardened nobles of his court. He would torture small animals for entertainment, push servants from high windows to watch them fall, and devise elaborate punishments for perceived slights that revealed a mind fascinated by suffering. When Ivan was crowned Tsar in 1547 at age 16, he didn't just inherit a throne. He inherited a kingdom that expected its rulers to be strong, feared, and absolutely unforgiving. The coronation ceremony was designed to reinforce the divine nature of his authority, with religious rituals that portrayed him as God's chosen representative on earth. But for Ivan, this wasn't just ceremony, it was literal truth. He genuinely believed that his will was God's will, and that any resistance to his commands was resistance to heaven itself. The early years of Ivan's reign were marked by significant achievements that earned him genuine support from many of his subjects. He expanded Russia's borders, reformed the legal system, and promoted trade and cultural development. He surrounded himself with capable advisors who helped him navigate the complex challenges of ruling a vast, diverse empire. To outside observers, Ivan seemed to be developing into exactly the kind of strong, effective ruler Russia needed. But beneath this facade of competent leadership, Ivan was developing an increasingly paranoid worldview that would eventually consume him. He began to see conspiracies everywhere, to interpret every setback as evidence of treason, and to believe that only through fear could he maintain the loyalty of his subjects. The same intelligence that made him an effective ruler in some areas became a weapon he turned against his own people. The turning point came with a series of personal tragedies that seemed to confirm Ivan's worst fears about the world around him. His beloved wife Anastasia died in 1560, and Ivan became convinced she had been poisoned by enemies at court. Whether this was true or not, Ivan's reaction was swift and brutal. He launched a campaign of terror against anyone he suspected of involvement, and the relatively restrained ruler of the 1550s began to transform into the monster history would remember. It was during this period of increasing paranoia and violence that Ivan commissioned the construction of what would become his most famous architectural legacy. The cathedral that would later bear the name of St. Basil began as a promise to God, a magnificent house of worship that would celebrate Russia's victory over the Mongol Khanates and demonstrate the divine favor that Ivan believed he enjoyed. The commission itself was unusual. Rather than hiring foreign architects, as was common for major projects, Ivan insisted on using Russian builders. He wanted this cathedral to be distinctly Russian, to represent the unique character of his empire and his people. The man chosen to lead this project was Postnik Yakovlev, a master builder whose reputation for innovation and artistic vision had earned him recognition throughout the Russian lands. Yakovlev wasn't just a craftsman. He was an artist whose vision would transform Ivan's simple request for a victory church into something unprecedented in architectural history. Where other builders might have created a traditional Orthodox cathedral, Yakovlev designed something that defied every convention of religious architecture. His cathedral would have not one dome, but 9, each unique in color and design, creating a visual symphony that would draw the eye heavenward while celebrating the earthly victory it commemorated. The construction process took years, with hundreds of skilled craftsmen working under Yakovlev's direction to create something that had never been attempted before. Every element of the cathedral was carefully planned, from the mathematical precision of its proportions to the symbolic meaning of its decorative elements. The result was a building that seemed to exist somewhere between earth and heaven, too beautiful to be purely human creation, too earthly to be purely divine. As the cathedral neared completion, word of its magnificence spread throughout Russia and beyond. Foreign visitors who glimpsed it during construction reported that nothing in their own lands could compare to the beauty and originality of Ivan's new church. The building was already being hailed as a masterpiece before it was even finished, a testament to Russian artistic achievement that would stand for centuries. But for Ivan, the cathedral's growing fame created an unexpected problem. The building that was supposed to demonstrate his glory was also demonstrating the genius of its creator. Every visitor who praised the cathedral mentioned the architect's vision, the builder's skill, the artistic achievement of the Russian craftsman. What Ivan had intended as a monument to his own power was becoming a monument to someone else's talent. This shift in perception coincided with Ivan's growing paranoia about loyalty and control. The Tsar, who had once been content to share credit with capable subordinates, was becoming obsessed with ensuring that no one else could claim credit for his achievements. The cathedral that should have been his greatest triumph was becoming, in his twisted mind, evidence of his dependence on others. The completion ceremony for the cathedral was scheduled for the autumn of 1561, with elaborate festivities planned to celebrate both the architectural achievement and the military victories it commemorated. Ivan himself would consecrate the building, blessing it in the name of God and claiming it as a symbol of his divine authority. The ceremony would mark not just the completion of a building, but the culmination of Ivan's transformation from a promising young ruler into the absolute monarch he believed God had called him to be. Um, Postnik Yakovlev prepared for the ceremony with the pride of a man who had achieved something truly extraordinary. He had taken Ivan's commission and transformed it into something that would outlast empires, a work of art that would speak to the human soul long after the political circumstances that created it had been forgotten. He had every reason to expect that his masterpiece would secure his place in history and his future at court. But as the ceremony approached, Ivan was wrestling with thoughts that would have horrified the architect who had served him so faithfully. The Tsar was beginning to see the cathedral not as a gift from a loyal subject, but as a threat to his own legacy. In his increasingly paranoid mind, Yakovlev's genius had become a problem that required a solution, and even the terrible was already planning exactly what that solution would be. The stage was set for one of history's most shocking betrayals, a crime that would reveal the true cost of serving a ruler who confused gratitude with weakness and saw loyalty as a threat to be eliminated rather than a gift to be treasured. The ceremony itself was a spectacle worthy of the masterpiece it celebrated. On October 1st, 1561, as autumn painted Moscow in shades of gold and crimson, thousands of citizens gathered in Red Square to witness the consecration of what would become known as St. Basil's Cathedral. The building rose before them like a vision from another world, its 9 domes catching the morning light and throwing it back in brilliant displays of color that seemed to dance across the sky. Ivan the Terrible arrived in his full regalia, wearing robes of gold and purple that proclaimed his divine authority to rule. He moved through the crowd with the calculated grace of a man who understood that every gesture, every expression, every moment of this ceremony would be remembered and discussed for generations. The Tsar was performing not just for his subjects, but for history itself, and he intended to ensure that this day would be remembered as the moment when his greatness was made manifest in stone and gold. But even as Ivan played his role as the gracious sovereign celebrating a magnificent achievement, his mind was already working through the implications of what Yakovlev had created. Every gasp of wonder from the crowd, every whispered comment about the architect's genius, every moment when attention focused on the building rather than the man who had commissioned it, fed the growing darkness in Ivan's thoughts. Postnik Yakovlev stood among the honored guests, watching as his life's work was blessed and consecrated. The architect felt the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something truly extraordinary, something that would outlast his own mortal existence and speak to future generations about the heights that human creativity could reach. He had transformed Ivan's simple request for a victory church into something that transcended politics and entered the realm of pure art. The architect had every reason to feel pride in this moment. He had solved architectural problems that had never been attempted before, creating a building that defied conventional wisdom about what was possible in stone and mortar. His innovative use of color and form had created something that was both deeply Russian and utterly unique, a building that would inspire countless others while remaining forever inimitable. As the religious ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Ivan approached Yakovlev with what appeared to be the warmest gratitude. The Tsar's words were gracious, his manner friendly, his expressions of satisfaction seemingly genuine. To outside observers, this looked like the perfect conclusion to a successful project, a grateful ruler rewarding a faithful servant for exceptional work. But those who knew Ivan well might have noticed subtle signs that all was not as it seemed. The Tsar's smile was perhaps too controlled, his praise too carefully measured, his questions about the building's construction too detailed for mere curiosity. Ivan was a man who had learned to hide his true intentions behind masks of courtesy and apparent goodwill, and he was wearing such a mask now. The conversations that followed the ceremony revealed the full scope of Ivan's growing obsession with the cathedral's implications. In private meetings with his closest advisors, the Tsar began to express concerns that seemed, on the surface, to be about practical matters of state security and royal prerogative. But beneath these rational-sounding worries lay something far darker and more personal. Ivan's first concern was about precedent. If he allowed one architect to gain fame for creating something beautiful, what would prevent other skilled craftsmen from expecting similar recognition? The Tsar, who had spent years consolidating absolute power, was beginning to see any sharing of credit as a dangerous erosion of his authority. In his mind, allowing subjects to be celebrated for their achievements was the first step toward allowing them to question his supremacy. The second concern was more immediate and more personal. Ivan had commissioned the cathedral as a monument to his own glory, but the building's fame was increasingly focusing on its creator rather than its commissioner. Foreign visitors spoke of the Russian architect's genius, not the Russian czar's wisdom in hiring him. This shift in narrative struck at the heart of Ivan's deepest insecurities about his own legacy and achievements. But perhaps most troubling to Ivan was a fear that he could never speak aloud, even to his closest confidants. What if Yakovlev could create something even more beautiful for someone else? What if the architect's loyalty was not to Ivan personally, but to his craft? What if the very genius that had created this masterpiece could be turned against him by a rival who offered better terms or greater artistic freedom? These fears might seem irrational to modern minds, but they made perfect sense to a ruler who had survived by assuming that everyone around him was a potential traitor. Ivan had learned early that today's loyal servant could become tomorrow's deadly enemy, and he was determined never to be vulnerable to such betrayal. The architect who had created beauty for him could, in theory, create beauty for his enemies, and in Ivan's paranoid worldview, that made Yakovlev a threat that needed to be eliminated. The decision, when it came, was made with the same cold calculation that Ivan applied to all matters of state security. He would not simply dismiss Yakovlev or exile him to distant lands, as a more conventional ruler might have done. Such half measures would leave the architect free to work for others, to create new masterpieces that might overshadow Ivan's cathedral, to demonstrate to the world that his genius was not tied to any particular patron. No, Ivan's solution would be both more permanent and more symbolic. He would ensure that Yakovlev could never create anything beautiful again, while simultaneously sending a message to anyone else who might be tempted to claim credit for achievements that Ivan considered his own. The method he chose was both practical and deeply personal. He would rob the architect of the very senses that made his artistry possible. The trap was set with the same attention to detail that Yakovlev had brought to his cathedral. Ivan arranged for a private meeting with the architect, ostensibly to discuss future projects and to express his continued gratitude for the magnificent building. The setting was intimate and informal, designed to put Yakovlev at ease and to reinforce the impression that the Tsar valued both his work and his person. Yakovlev arrived at the meeting with plans and sketches for other possible projects, his mind already working on ways to build upon the success of the cathedral. He had ideas for churches, palaces, and civic buildings that would further demonstrate the capabilities of Russian architecture and craftsmanship. The architect was excited about the possibilities that his success had opened up, viewing the cathedral not as the end of his career, but as the beginning of an even more ambitious phase of his artistic life. The conversation began pleasantly enough, with Ivan expressing his satisfaction with the cathedral and his amazement at the positive response it had received from both Russian subjects and foreign visitors. The Tsar seemed genuinely interested in Yakovlev's ideas for future projects, asking detailed questions about techniques and materials that suggested he was seriously considering additional commissions. But as the meeting progressed, Ivan's questions became more pointed and more personal. He wanted to know about Yakovlev's training, his influences, his methods for achieving such remarkable results. The architect, flattered by the attention and eager to share his knowledge, answered openly and honestly, not realizing that he was providing Ivan with exactly the information the Tsar needed to justify what he was about to do. The moment of truth came when Ivan posed a seemingly innocent question. "Tell me, Master Builder, could you create something even more beautiful than what you have made for me?" It was a question that had no good answer. If Yakovlev said yes, he would be admitting that he had not given his best work to his Tsar. If he said no, he would be limiting his own artistic potential and possibly disappointing a ruler who might want even grander projects in the future. Yakovlev chose honesty, explaining that every project was different, that beauty took many forms, and that while he was proud of the cathedral, he believed he could continue to grow and improve as an artist. It was a reasonable answer, even a humble one, But to Ivan's paranoid mind, it was a confession of exactly what he feared most, that his architect's greatest work might yet be created for someone else. The Tsar's response was swift and decisive. Guards who had been waiting outside the chamber entered on his signal, seizing Yakovlev before he could react or even understand what was happening. The architect who had spent years creating beauty was about to discover the price of genius in a world ruled by a man who confused loyalty with possession and saw talent as a threat to be eliminated rather than a gift to be treasured. What happened next would shock even the hardened courtiers who had witnessed Ivan's previous acts of cruelty. The Tsar, who had once seemed capable of growth and wisdom, was about to demonstrate that absolute power combined with paranoid fear could transform even gratitude into an instrument of torture. The cathedral that had been built to celebrate victory was about to become the cause of one of history's most senseless acts of violence. The beautiful domes that still catch the morning light over Red Square stand as monuments not just to architectural achievement, but to the terrible price that brilliance sometimes pays when it encounters power without conscience or wisdom without mercy. The torture chamber beneath the Kremlin was a place where screams echoed off stone walls and the air itself seemed to carry the weight of human suffering. Ivan had designed this room personally, with the same attention to detail that others might bring to a garden or a library. Every instrument had been carefully selected, every surface positioned to maximize both physical agony and psychological terror. This was where Ivan brought those who had disappointed him, those who had betrayed him, and now, those who had simply succeeded too well. Pusnik Yakovlev was dragged into this hell, still wearing the fine clothes he had donned for what he thought would be a celebration of his greatest achievement. The architect's mind struggled to process what was happening. One moment he had been discussing future projects with his Tsar, the next he was being chained to a stone table while Ivan the Terrible stood over him, with instruments that belonged in a surgeon's kit, if surgeons were demons. "You created something beautiful," Ivan said, his voice carrying the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. "Too beautiful. Beauty like that makes people forget who truly deserves their loyalty, who truly deserves their praise." The Tsar picked up a thin metal rod that had been heated until it glowed like a small sun. "I cannot allow you to create such beauty for anyone else. I cannot allow you to make anyone else forget that I am the source of all glory in this realm." The first touch of the heated metal to Yakovlev's right eye was accompanied by a scream that seemed to come from the very depths of human suffering. The smell of burning flesh filled the chamber, mixing with the architect's agonized cries to create a symphony of horror that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. But Ivan was not finished. One eye destroyed was not enough. He needed to ensure that Yakovlev could never again see beauty, never again envision the architectural marvels that had made him famous. The second eye followed the first, and with it went not just Yakovlev's sight, but any hope he might have had that this was some terrible mistake, some misunderstanding that could be corrected with explanations or apologies. Ivan was methodical in his cruelty, taking his time to ensure that the damage was complete and irreversible. The architect who had seen his cathedral rise like a prayer, made manifest would never see anything again. But even this wasn't enough to satisfy Ivan's twisted sense of justice. The hands that had drawn the plans, that had guided the construction, that had brought beauty into the world, these too were threats that needed to be eliminated. The Tsar ordered his guards to crush Yakovlev's fingers one by one, breaking the bones that had once sketched dreams in stone and mortar. The architect's cries became weaker with each new injury, his voice growing hoarse from screaming, his body going into shock from the accumulated trauma. Through it all, Ivan watched with the detached interest of a student observing a particularly fascinating experiment. He showed no anger, no passion, no emotion at all, just the cold calculation of a man solving a problem. To him, this wasn't cruelty for its own sake, but a necessary action to protect his power and ensure his legacy. The architect's suffering was simply the price of doing business in a world where absolute rulers could not afford to share credit for their achievements. When the torture was finally complete, Yakovlev was no longer the master builder who had created one of the world's most beautiful buildings. He was a broken man, blind and crippled, his artistic gifts destroyed as thoroughly as if they had never existed. The hands that had once created beauty could no longer hold a pencil, let alone guide the construction of a cathedral. The eyes that had once seen architectural possibilities in empty space would never again distinguish light from darkness. But Ivan's cruelty had one final, particularly vicious twist. Rather than allowing Yakovlev to die from his injuries, the Tsar ordered that he be given medical treatment to ensure his survival. The architect would live, but he would live as a warning to others, a reminder of what happened to those who dared to excel too brilliantly in service to Ivan the Terrible. He would spend his remaining years as a beggar on the streets of Moscow, a living testament to the price of genius in a world ruled by monsters. The other architects and craftsmen who had worked on the cathedral received a different but equally chilling message. They were summoned to court and informed that their work on the building had been satisfactory, but that they would never again be permitted to work on any project of similar scope or ambition. Some were exiled to distant provinces, others were assigned to mundane construction projects that would never showcase their talents. The message was clear: serve Ivan competently, but never so brilliantly that you might overshadow him. Word of Yakovlev's fate spread through Moscow like wildfire, carried by whispers and rumors that grew more horrific with each retelling. The story became a cautionary tale told by parents to their children, by masters to their apprentices, by anyone who worked in the creative arts. Excellence was dangerous, they learned. Genius was a curse. Better to be mediocre and safe than brilliant and dead. The cathedral itself took on a different meaning in the minds of those who knew the truth about its creator's fate. What had once been a symbol of Russian achievement and divine favor became something darker, a monument to the price of artistic ambition, a beautiful prison that had cost its architect everything he valued. Visitors who came to admire the building's unique domes and intricate details were unaware that they were looking at what amounted to a man's funeral monument, built not after his death but before his destruction. Ivan, meanwhile, seemed to take genuine pleasure in the way the story of Yakovlev's punishment affected others. He would often bring foreign visitors to see the cathedral, praising its beauty while making subtle references to the fate of its creator. The Tsar enjoyed watching as his guests realized what he was truly saying: that beauty created in his realm belonged to him alone, and that those who created it did so at their own peril. The psychological impact of this calculated cruelty extended far beyond the immediate circle of architects and craftsmen. Ivan's courtiers began to understand that their Tsar was not merely ruthless in political matters, but genuinely sadistic in his treatment of those who served him. The man who had once seemed capable of growth and wisdom was revealing himself to be something far more dangerous, a ruler who saw human beings as objects to be used and discarded according to his whims. Religious leaders who had blessed the cathedral found themselves in an impossible position. How could they continue to celebrate a building that had been consecrated with such innocent blood? How could they praise God for inspiring such beauty when that same beauty had led to such horror? Some began to speak privately of the cathedral as cursed, while others argued that its beauty was proof of divine grace that could transcend even human evil. The foreign diplomats who witnessed Ivan's casual references to Yakovlev's fate carried the story back to their own courts, where it became part of the growing legend of Ivan the Terrible. European rulers began to understand that they were dealing with something unprecedented, not just a powerful enemy, but a man whose capacity for cruelty seemed to have no limits. The story of the blinded architect became a diplomatic tool, used to warn other rulers about the dangers of trusting or underestimating the Russian Tsar. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this entire episode was how it affected the development of Russian art and architecture. The lesson that Ivan taught through Yakovlev's punishment was absorbed by generations of creative minds. Never shine too brightly, never create anything so beautiful that it might overshadow the ruler who commissioned it. The flowering of Russian artistic achievement that had begun with the cathedral was stunted by fear, as talented individuals chose safety over excellence. The cathedral that should have inspired a golden age of Russian architecture instead became a monument to the end of that age. Future builders would look at its magnificent domes and understand that they represented not just artistic achievement, but artistic suicide. The building that had been created to celebrate victory became a symbol of defeat. The defeat of human creativity by inhuman power. As the years passed and Ivan's reign continued its descent into madness and terror, the story of Postnik Yakovlev became part of a larger pattern of destruction that would define the Tsar's legacy. The ruler who had once shown promise as a reformer and builder was systematically destroying the very foundations of civilization in his own realm. The cathedral stood as a beautiful reminder of what Russia might have become if genius had been rewarded rather than punished, if excellence had been celebrated rather than feared. The blind architect himself disappeared from historical records after his punishment, becoming one of the countless victims whose individual stories were lost in the larger narrative of Ivan's reign of terror. But his cathedral remained, its colorful domes continuing to catch the light and inspire wonder in all who saw them. The building that had cost him everything continued to speak of beauty and possibility, even as its creator lived in darkness and despair. In the end, Ivan's attempt to claim sole credit for the cathedral's beauty failed as completely as his attempt to destroy Yakovlev's legacy. The building itself became the architect's true monument, a work of art that would outlast empires and continue to inspire long after both creator and destroyer had been forgotten. The Tsar, who had thought he could possess beauty by destroying those who created it, had instead ensured that his greatest architectural achievement would forever be associated with his greatest crime. The cathedral still stands today, its dome still brilliant against the Moscow sky, still drawing visitors from around the world to marvel at its unique beauty. But now you know the true story behind its creation, not just the tale of artistic achievement, but the darker truth about the price that brilliance sometimes pays when it encounters power without conscience or wisdom without mercy. Today, St. Basil's Cathedral stands as one of the most recognizable buildings in the world, its rainbow domes appearing on postcards, tourist brochures, and travel documentaries that celebrate the wonders of Russian architecture. Millions of visitors walk through Red Square each year, craning their necks to admire the impossible beauty of those swirling, colorful spires that seem to defy both gravity and conventional architectural wisdom. But as you stand before this masterpiece, remember that you are looking at more than just a building. You are witnessing the physical manifestation of one of history's most profound contradictions, a monument to human creativity that was consecrated with human suffering, a celebration of divine inspiration that was tainted by diabolic cruelty. The tourists who pose for selfies in front of those magnificent domes have no idea that they are standing at the site of one of the most calculated acts of artistic destruction in human history. The guides who recite facts about the cathedral's construction date and architectural significance rarely mention the true cost of its creation, not just the gold and stone and labor that went into its building, but the human price paid by the man whose vision brought it into existence. The irony is as bitter as it is complete. Even the terrible who destroyed Pusnik Yakovlev to ensure that no one else would be remembered for creating beauty is now remembered primarily for his cruelty. The cathedral that was meant to glorify the Tsar's name has instead become a monument to the architect's genius. History has delivered its own verdict on Ivan's twisted logic. The man who tried to possess beauty by destroying its creator has been forgotten as a builder and remembered only as a monster. Walk through any major museum in the world, and you will find displays dedicated to the architectural wonders of Russia. St. Basil's Cathedral features prominently in these exhibitions, its unique design celebrated as a masterpiece of creative vision and technical innovation. But search through these same museums for tributes to Ivan the Terrible's building projects, and you will find almost nothing. The tyrant who thought he could claim credit for beauty by eliminating its creator has instead ensured that his name is associated only with darkness. The cathedral's enduring appeal lies not in its connection to political power, but in its transcendence of such connections. People from every nation and culture respond to its beauty because it speaks to something universal in the human experience. Our capacity to create meaning and wonder out of simple materials like stone and metal and glass. The building succeeds as art precisely because it rises above the political circumstances that created it, becoming something larger than the sum of its historical parts. Modern architects study St. Basil's Cathedral not to understand Ivan the Terrible's vision, but to learn from Pusnik Yakovlev's innovations. The techniques that the architect developed for creating those impossible domes, the mathematical principles that govern their proportions, the artistic choices that make their colors work together in perfect harmony, these are the elements that continue to inspire and educate. The building's true legacy lies not in the power it was meant to represent, but in the creativity it continues to demonstrate. The lesson of Pusnik Yakovlev's story extends far beyond the specific circumstances of 16th century Russia. Throughout history, creative individuals have faced the same fundamental challenge: how to serve power without being destroyed by it, how to create beauty in a world that often values control more than excellence, how to maintain artistic integrity while navigating the dangerous waters of political patronage. Some artists have learned to make themselves indispensable by creating works that are beautiful but not threatening, impressive but not revolutionary. Others have found ways to embed their true vision within seemingly conventional projects, hiding their genius behind facades of acceptable mediocrity. Still others have chosen to work in obscurity, creating masterpieces that will never be seen by the powerful patrons who might destroy them. But perhaps the most important lesson of Yakovlev's story is that true artistic achievement cannot be possessed or controlled by those who commission it. Ivan the Terrible could destroy the architect's eyes and hands, but he could not destroy the vision that had created the cathedral. The building itself became proof that beauty, once brought into the world, takes on a life of its own that transcends the circumstances of its creation. This is why dictators throughout history have always feared artists, writers, and creative thinkers. They understand instinctively that creativity is a form of power that cannot be completely controlled, that the act of making something beautiful is inherently subversive to systems based on fear and oppression. The tyrant who can command armies and terrorize nations finds himself helpless before a work of art that speaks to truths he cannot silence. The cathedral that Ivan commissioned to glorify his reign has instead become a testimony to the persistence of human creativity in the face of inhuman cruelty. Every visitor who stands in Red Square and feels their spirit lifted by those impossible domes is participating in Postnik Yakovlev's ultimate victory over the man who tried to destroy him. The architect's vision has outlasted the Tsar's power, his beauty has survived the tyrant's violence, his legacy has transcended the circumstances of his suffering. Yet we must not let the beauty of the cathedral blind us to the horror of its creator's fate. The fact that great art can emerge from terrible circumstances does not justify those circumstances or make them acceptable. Postnik Yakovlev's suffering was not a necessary price for his masterpiece. It was a senseless tragedy that robbed the world of whatever other wonders his genius might have created. The story of the blinded architect serves as a warning that resonates across centuries and cultures. It reminds us that the relationship between art and power is always fraught with danger, that those who create beauty must always be prepared to defend it against those who would possess or destroy it. It teaches us that true appreciation of artistic achievement requires us to remember not just the beauty that was created, but the human cost that sometimes went into its creation. As you leave this story behind and return to your own world, carry with you the image of those magnificent domes rising against the Moscow sky. But remember too the man who could no longer see them after their completion, who paid the ultimate price for the crime of creating something too beautiful for a tyrant to bear. His darkness is part of their light, his suffering part of their beauty, his sacrifice part of their eternal testimony to the power of human creativity, to transcend even the cruelest attempts to destroy it. In the end, St. Basil's Cathedral stands not as a monument to Ivan the Terrible's glory, but as a memorial to Postnik Yakovlev's vision, a reminder that true beauty belongs not to those who commission it, but to those who create it, and ultimately to all of humanity who can still see it, appreciate it, and learn from it. The architect's greatest triumph was not that he survived his ordeal, but that his masterpiece survived to inspire wonder in hearts and minds that Ivan the Terrible could never have imagined, in a world that the tyrant's cruelty could never completely darken. The cathedral's true victory over Ivan's cruelty becomes clear when we understand what happened to the tyrant himself in his final years. The man who had destroyed Postnik Yakovlev to preserve his own legacy descended into the very madness he had once inflicted on others. By the 1580s, Ivan was a broken shell of his former self, his body racked with disease, his mind consumed by paranoia so complete that he trusted no one, not even his own reflection. The Tsar, who had once commanded absolute obedience, found himself isolated in his own palace, surrounded by guards who feared him but no longer respected him. His courtiers had learned to anticipate his moods and avoid his attention, understanding that even the slightest misstep could result in torture and death. The man who had thought he could control beauty by destroying its creator had instead created a world where beauty itself was afraid to exist. In his final months, Ivan would sometimes order his guards to carry him to Red Square so he could look upon the cathedral that had cost Yakovlev everything. Court observers noted that the sight of those colorful domes seemed to both fascinate and torment the dying tyrant. Perhaps in his lucid moments he understood what he had really accomplished, not the preservation of his own glory, but the creation of a monument to his own cruelty. The irony deepened when Ivan's own son, the heir he had spent his life trying to secure, died in 1581 during one of the Tsar's violent rages. In a fit of anger over some trivial political disagreement, Ivan struck his son with an iron rod, inflicting injuries that would prove fatal. The dynasty that Ivan had tried to protect through acts of unspeakable cruelty died with him, leaving Russia to face a period of chaos and civil war that would be remembered as the time of troubles. When Ivan the Terrible finally died in 1584, his death was met not with the mourning that should accompany the passing of a great ruler, but with relief so profound that it seemed to lift a curse from the entire kingdom. The man who had tried to make himself immortal through monuments and terror had instead ensured that his name would be remembered only for the suffering he had caused. The cathedral, meanwhile, continued to evolve and grow more beautiful with each passing year. Subsequent rulers added new elements, commissioned additional decorations, and maintained the building with the reverence due to a true masterpiece. Each generation of Russians who looked upon those impossible domes understood that they were witnessing something that transcended politics and power, a work of art that spoke to the eternal human capacity to create beauty even in the darkest circumstances. Foreign visitors who came to Moscow in the centuries following Ivan's death invariably commented on the strange contrast between the cathedral's joyful beauty and the dark stories that surrounded its creation. The building that had been born from paranoia and consecrated with blood had somehow transformed itself into a symbol of hope and resilience. The domes that had once reflected Ivan's twisted glory now reflected only light and possibility. As the Russian Empire expanded and evolved, the cathedral became a symbol not of tyrannical power but of Russian cultural achievement. Artists, poets, and musicians drew inspiration from its unique beauty, creating works that celebrated the human spirit's ability to triumph over oppression. The building that Ivan had intended as a monument to his own authority became instead a testament to the power of creativity to outlast even the most determined attempts to destroy it. The story of Postnik Yakovlev and his cathedral has been told and retold countless times over the centuries, but it has never lost its power to shock and inspire. Each generation discovers new meanings in the tale of the architect who paid the ultimate price for creating something too beautiful for a tyrant to bear. The story serves as both warning and inspiration, a reminder of the dangers that creative individuals face when they serve power without conscience, and a celebration of the way true art transcends the circumstances of its creation. Today, as you stand in Red Square and look up at those magnificent domes, you are participating in Postnik Yakovlev's ultimate victory over the man who tried to destroy him. The architect's vision has outlasted the Tsar's power, his beauty has conquered the tyrant's cruelty, and his legacy has transcended the darkness of his suffering. Every photograph taken, every gasp of wonder uttered, every moment of joy inspired by those impossible colors and shapes is a testament to the enduring power of human creativity. The cathedral stands as proof that beauty, once brought into the world, cannot be controlled or destroyed by those who fear it. Ivan the Terrible could blind the architect's eyes, but he could not blind the world to the wonder that Yakovlev had created. He could crush the artist's hands, but he could not crush the inspiration that continues to flow from his masterpiece. He could destroy the man, but he could not destroy the vision that had taken form in stone and gold and brilliant color. In the end, St. Basil's Cathedral represents the ultimate triumph of light over darkness, of creativity over destruction, of the human spirit over the forces that would crush it. The building that was meant to glorify a tyrant has instead become a monument to the artist he destroyed, a reminder that true beauty belongs not to those who commission it, but to those who create it, and ultimately to all of humanity who can still see it and be moved by it. As our story closes, remember that the next time you encounter something of extraordinary beauty, whether it's a building, a painting, a piece of music, or a work of literature, you are witnessing the victory of human creativity over all the forces that would suppress it. Behind every masterpiece lies a story of courage, sacrifice, and the determination to create something meaningful despite the risks. The artists who create these works are the true heroes of human history, and their legacy is measured not in the power they wielded, but in the beauty they brought into the world. The colorful domes of St. Basil's Cathedral continue to catch the light over Red Square, as they have for more than 4 centuries. They stand as eternal witnesses to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human cruelty. But most importantly, they stand as proof that beauty, once created, becomes immortal, outlasting empires, transcending politics, and speaking to the hearts of all who encounter it. In their silent testimony, we find the ultimate answer to tyranny, not in violence or revenge, but in the persistent, patient, eternal power of human creativity to transform the world.